Ah, the sweet bliss of post-coital sleep, that's what allowed me to slip handcuffs onto my wife's wrist, fastening it to our custom-made, handcrafted ashwood headboard. She didn't wake up right away. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open before a scream escaped her lips. That scream woke her lover, Bob Simmons, who soon realized his own wrist was also cuffed. Bob let out a more masculine yell as he tumbled off the bed, twisting his arm and cutting his wrist in the process. He scrambled back onto the bed, words stuck in his throat. "I'm guessing it's quite a shock to wake up and see your mistress's husband standing at the foot of the bed, a large revolver aimed directly at you. Did you sleep well?" I asked. "Oh my God, Jerry, it's not what it looks like," my wife sobbed. "Well, let's break down exactly what it looks like," I said. "You're lying in our marital bed, with a stranger, trying to convince me you're a faithful wife. Don't do anything rash, man," Bob croaked. "You don't want to go to jail over a cheating wife." His eyes were glued to the .35 Magnum in my hand. Made sense, considering I was trembling, equal parts rage and heartbreak. "Here's the man you're leaving me for. If you were still my wife, I might have to defend your honor, but since that's clearly not the case anymore, I really don't care. Funny that he still seems to hold you in such high regard." Bob ignored that remark, and so did she. "Jerry, please, put the gun down. Let's talk about this. That bastard isn't worth jail time," she pleaded. "Wow. Looks like the bloom is off the rose in this relationship, huh? He calls you names, you call him names. I thought you'd show him more respect after all. This is the guy you decided was worth splitting us up for. Jerry, this isn't the end. Yes, I made a huge mistake, but we can work through this. I can fix it, I swear." "How exactly are you planning to do that?" I asked. "Going to turn back the clock and not sleep with him? That's the only way I see this ever working out. I loved you so much, but if the alternative is to live with someone unfaithful, then what choice do I have?" I lifted the revolver to my temple. "Maybe I should just end it right here. One pull of the trigger, and I'm free from the pain." "You'd be free too." "Jerry, no," she screamed. "Do it," he shouted. Slowly, I lowered the gun, an idea forming. I popped open the cylinder, releasing 6 rounds, which clattered to the floor. I bent down and picked one up. Bob made some pathetic attempt to break the headboard but failed miserably. "What a loser," I muttered as he calmed down when I picked up the lone cartridge. Horror dawned on Bob's face. "This is a .35 Magnum round, 125 grams of solid metal. When fired, it leaves the barrel at 500 feet per second. It flattens on impact and nearly triples its surface area. Even if you survive the initial hit, the wound is likely to make you bleed out." I had their full attention now. I loaded the cartridge into the revolver's drum. "Barb, you know how much I used to love to gamble. It almost ruined us in those early years. I stopped for you. Don't get me wrong, I've benefited from quitting, but the only reason I had the strength to stop was because I loved you so much." I paused, sorrow weighing my voice. I tilted the revolver slightly and spun the cylinder before flicking my wrist, locking it back into place. "Since I'm not sure what to do, I'll leave it to chance, the finger of fate, if you will." Slowly, I pointed the gun at Bob. "Since you're the guest of honor here, Bob, I think we should start with you. Would you like to leave a message for your wife and daughters? Because if this bullet finds you, it's going to be awfully lonely at 726, Maple Lane. Your wife Allison, your twin daughters Zoe and Chloe, they'll be devastated when they see the package I had my investigator send them." His face turned ghostly white as I spoke. "I thought about sending them less pornographic pictures, but I figured they should see exactly what you've been up to during those late nights at the office. I also made sure to include photos of your other mistresses, just to give them the full picture." Bob went paler still when I aimed the gun at him. He wet himself as I cocked the hammer. I pulled the trigger. Click. The hammer fell on an empty chamber. He looked like he was about to pass out, but he regained some composure, though the wet sheets around him told a different story. "Well, Bob, you've survived this round. Maybe you'll get to see your daughters again after all." Next, I pointed the gun at my wife. "How about you, Barb? Are you ready to meet your maker? You went to church last Sunday, didn't you?" Did you confess your sins? If you die today without that confession, do you go to heaven, or is it still hell for adulterers in your religion? She whispered, yes. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. What did you say? Yes, Jerry. Adultery is a sin. It's a sin against my spouse and a sin against God. I never confessed what I did. If that bullet hits me, I'm going to hell. Well, let's see if your God wants you to live, I replied. I cocked the hammer and pulled the trigger. Click. The hammer fell on another empty cartridge. She sobbed as I raised the revolver to my temple again. Barb, before you came into my life, I was in a really dark place, I told her. The only time I ever felt alive was when I was on a winning streak. It was never about the money, it was always about the thrill. I could still remember how kind and gentle she was that night in the ER, tending to my hands after Gino's thugs roughed me up. I told myself that if I had a woman like her by my side, I wouldn't need the rush of gambling. Did I ever tell her it was the memory of her bandaging my hands that made me quit? I paid Gino off that night and haven't touched a deck of cards since. I know life without her would be hell, she was my rock. If that bullet hits me, the pain ends, and she won't be able to hurt me anymore. Part of me almost wanted it to happen. I said this quietly as she continued to cry. I pulled the trigger again. Click. The hammer dropped on another empty cartridge. My wife screamed, and Bob cursed under his breath. I turned the revolver on Bob. Since this might be your last moments on Earth, Bob, tell me, why do you chase after married women? I really don't get it. Your wife is attractive, your daughters seem lovely. Why? I asked. Please, man, don't kill me, he begged. I shrugged, cocking the hammer again with my thumb. Suddenly, Bob burst into tears. It's all about the chase, he sobbed. Figuring out what turns them on, then working them. Your wife, she was unhappy with you. In any marriage, even the good ones, there are rough patches and frustrations. All I had to do was flatter her a little, tell her how sexy and helpful she was, and she was all over me. Anyway, this was going to be the last time. Once I screw another man's wife in his bed, the game's over, and I win, he cried. He looked utterly pitiful lying there on the dirty sheets. Honestly, I should have snapped a picture for posterity, but I didn't want any evidence tying me to this mess. He groaned again, trying. I looked into his eyes as he struggled, and without a word, I pulled the trigger again. Click. The hammer fell on another empty cartridge. The coward passed out cold, losing consciousness in his own sweat and piss. I then raised the revolver and turned it toward my wife. Well, Barb, looks like it's either you or me, I said, feeling a bitter sadness. It's almost funny that Bob dodged the bullet, literally. I still love you, Barb, but a part of me wishes it wasn't you. Things would have been a lot simpler if I came home, found you two here, and then couldn't take it and killed myself. You'd be alive, free to do whatever you wanted, and I wouldn't have to deal with the pain or the guilt of murder. She tried to stay calm, but we were both hanging by a thread at this point. Jerry, please, just stop this. You've made your point. Bob's passed out from fear, sitting in his own mess. You win. Put the gun down, and we can convince Bob not to press charges. You haven't done anything that can't be undone. I want to stay with you. But if you need to end it, I'll sign any divorce papers you want. I'll spend every day making up for my sins. Please, Jerry, don't do this, she begged, her voice cracking. I shook my head, not even sure who I was anymore. Barb, I don't think I'm Jerry anymore. When I found out what you'd done, I was furious. But finding out you did it in our bed, that killed something inside me. I think right now, I'm just fate's instrument. Let's see if it's your time, shall we? I cocked the hammer once more and pulled the trigger. Click. Another empty chamber. Barb let out a roar of panic as I turned the revolver on myself. Looks like fate has spoken, I said quietly. I love you, Barb. I'm sorry it's come to this. I hope you find happiness. Slowly, I pulled the trigger again, but this time aiming the revolver at my own head. Jerry, please, don't, she screamed, yanking against the handcuffs in desperation. I'll leave. I'll stay, and you can beat me senseless, anything. Just don't do this. Oh God, please, someone help, she cried out, her voice breaking. I sighed, sadness weighing me down. It's better this way, Barb. I love you, I said, shutting my eyes and pulling the trigger. Click. The hammer dropped on yet another empty chamber. I guess I should explain, I said, turning to her, watching the confusion on her face. See, I've always been good with my hands. Gino may have messed up my left hand, but my right hand still works fine. Card tricks, flipping chips, coin tosses, they all train your fingers. So getting a bullet out of a revolver's drum without anyone noticing? Not that hard, especially when your audience is focused on the barrel. Tilting the revolver just right let me pull the cartridge into the palm of my hand. I paused, grinning darkly. After that, it was all just a game. Why? Because I wanted you both to feel fear, to feel pain. But I wasn't ready for the real thing, sending you two to hell, or sending myself there. I laughed, a deep, bitter laugh, as I looked at her. Did you really think I'd end up in jail over the likes of you two? Huh. I laughed so hard I could barely catch my breath. Still chuckling, I bent down, picking up the 6 rounds I'd dropped earlier, and loaded the revolver for real this time. No point in taking any chances now. I tossed the key to Barb, who was still sobbing, panting slightly from panic. Bob, meanwhile, was starting to come to, dazed and confused. Barb, however, just sat there crying, making no move to pick up the key. I noticed Bob's eyes darting toward the key, and then back at me, trying to figure out his next move. Take the key, Bob, I told him coldly. Get dressed, and get out. Consider this a lesson learned. Right now, you get to live, but if I hear even a whisper from the cops about what happened here today, I swear, I'll kill you and your family in the most painful way imaginable. Keep your mouth shut, and you'll save not just yourself, but your wife and kids too. Would I really have done it? Probably not. But I needed Bob to believe I was serious. Otherwise, I could have been looking at years in prison. In the end, Bob never breathed a word about that night. As for Barb, she was devastated, but she signed the divorce papers without much of a fight. It helped that the settlement was pretty fair. I didn't ask for much besides my grandmother's wedding ring and for her to go back to her maiden name. She moved to Grand Rapids, and now she sends me birthday wishes on Facebook every year. Doesn't seem like she's dating, but I don't really check her social media. I wasn't lying when I said I loved her. I still do, and sometimes, the anger comes back when I think about what she did to me. But life moves on. There are more good days than bad now, and I've even found a few friends with benefits. As for Bob, he's divorced, living in some dingy one-bedroom apartment, drowning under spousal and child support. Last I heard, it's broken him. I sent him one message before he blocked me: if you ever want to end it, you can borrow my revolver.